Okay, so I'm here with Vikkramm. He's a talented filmmaker that has a film competition in Valencia called The Perfect Murder. Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Brilliant film, I've seen it a couple of times.
Thank you.
Basically a two-hander. Well, I'll hand over to you. What's the synopsis of the film, please, Vikkramm?
Well, The Perfect Murder is an urban crime drama. It's set in Mumbai. It's an urban family, and it's about a struggling actor, and who marries a rich heiress, and he wants her to bankroll his film, and then things get out of hand. That's what it's all about.
So is this based on your personal experience?
It has nothing to do with that. It is, in fact, it's inspired from a lot of the crime that we see in Bombay these days.
Yeah.
I mean, for the last 15 years, ever since a lot of prosperity came in. So you see lots of crimes of passion. And then you also see crimes which are premeditated, where people give a lot of thought to it. And you see people killing each other sometimes, trying to kill each other within the same family. And one wonders, a lot of this crime you see is the perpetrators are people you see around you every day. It could be people you see in a coffee shop,
yeah,
or people they appear otherwise they have very normal personalities. There's nothing very dark about them at first sight. But there is a school of thought that there is a sense of darkness in everyone.
Oh,
There's a dark side to everyone.
Yeah.
So that's what this film explores. That's the inspiration.
And I know you sort of touched upon this, but this kind of crime that we're talking about, where it could be a rich man or rich woman, and their spouses are there, let's be honest, really for the money, right? Kind of. I mean, I suppose you could say it's a common crime around the world, I don't know. But is it a common crime in India as the wealth has come through? Is that something that's become more visible?
Not murdering a spouse for money. I wouldn't say that's a common crime, but then there are a lot of crimes like that where you realize a lot of thought has gone into planning the crime.
Right.
So that's something, because I can understand, crimes in the heat of the moment, say a road rage murder or something.
Yeah.
But then a crime which is committed in cold blood with a lot of thought given to it, that's something which appears very, odd and very shocking.
Yeah, because
there's a lot of
Yeah, no. So because what I would call a crime of passion is often not premeditated, and something happens in the relationship, and something snaps. Yeah.
True.
And I can kind of, I'm not condoning it at all, but I can understand how that can happen. Because basically your heart's been broken or something, whatever's happened, and we've all got the potential to do something dark.
Yeah, because when there is a lot of plotting and planning, that means there's a lot of time lapse between getting the idea and actually executing it. That means there's so much time to realize the magnitude of what you're doing and how wrong it is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen, and sometimes people still go through with it. So that's very intriguing.
And tell me a little bit about yourself, because you come across, you obviously, you're well educated. You're very positive, I suspect. How did you get into filmmaking? What's your backstory?
Well, I always wanted to be a filmmaker, right, since the beginning. When I grew up in Bombay, where I was exposed to a wide variety of cinema, French cinema, Iranian cinema, Bollywood, and the cinema of Hollywood, Hitchcock, Francis Ford Coppola, and
so all the greats. We're talking all the greats that we know. Yeah, of course.
So after my graduation, I wanted to explore filmmaking, wanted to get into it, but that was the time when the entry barriers were very high.
Yeah.
Because films were made with actual film cameras, and if you wanted to edit also, you had to start from scratch and work your way up in the cutting room. So there were a lot of entry barriers, so to say. And so I got into the web medium. That's when I started making websites, because I had qualified into I had a diploma in digital design, and I also learned animation and editing back in the day.
So you're right. So forgive me for interrupting.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting point you just made there about still talking about the time of analog film, 35mm. But forgive me for asking. I suspect that you just happen to be in the right place in terms of, bear with me, the transition from digital to film, because I'm guessing you're there as it's all changing, which is probably a fantastic time to be, because suddenly new people are coming through. They've got to learn this new technology, and would I be right in suspecting you just happen to be at the right time for that?
That's true. There was a time when I realized that technology had changed so much that the entry barriers had come down, so I could now review my original dream of wanting to make a film. It was much easier because film cameras had given way to digital cameras.
Yeah.
And they all worked on the same principle. Instead of fast and slow film, you have ISO settings, and then you have a lot of things like that. If you understand photography, videography is not really a big deal, and everything else remained the same, except that it was possible for anyone. Today, with an iPhone, you can make a film.
Yes.
None of my films have been shot on the iPhone, but then there have been films like that which have won Academy Awards also, and are taken very seriously. So then there's nothing to prevent you from making a film, and that's when I decided to plunge into it headlong. And I also, in fact, trained as an actor, wanting to understand what it is like to be in the shoes of an actor. And I've never assisted anybody, and all my knowledge has come from books and videos that there's been a democratization of filmmaking, I believe, in the last decade or so, with social media, with YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and everything. That makes it very easy to get the word out.
Yes.
And reach a global audience. So that's what encouraged me and to take the leap and do this.
And of course, you're absolutely right. The cost, equipment-wise, filmmaking has dropped radically, profoundly, actually. But that doesn't mean you still got to have a good story, right?
True.
Doesn't matter how cheap the equipment is. If you can't tell a good story, it's pointless. Which sort of kind of leads me on to, I know where you had some inspiration for this film, but even so, how do you turn that idea or that thought into the perfect murder? Because going from an idea to a finished product, finished film, is a long process, right?
Right.
And I suspect, or maybe I'm wrong, that the film we see here may not necessarily be the film you had to begin with, or maybe it is, I don't know, because things change and evolve. So perhaps you can give us an idea of how you went from that idea to the end film that we have now, and what process did you go through to get there?
Well, in a sense, writing comes naturally to me because my father was a very prolific writer. He wrote 10 books in his lifetime, so I get that from him. And in terms of writing, otherwise, you start with an idea, then you write a story, then you write a screenplay and the dialogues, and then you have a complete script. Mm-hmm. That's how it's supposed to work, but it's really not as linear as that. Because sometimes when you're writing a story, you think of an interesting scene, and you make a note of it. Or if you think of a good dialogue or something, but ultimately it all comes together when there is you have everything in place: the story, screenplay, dialogues, and then you have a bound script. So
you won't even necessarily start at the beginning, as I assume you would, and go to the end. You might start with an ending and work backwards, or however you do it. It's just your writing process is, because when I think of linear, I think of a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it may not in that order. But it may not necessarily be in that order. You may have come up with the ending first. I don't know.
Yes, that's true. In fact, I personally like character-driven dramas. So with me, it starts sometimes with an interesting character and the motivation of that character. You put that character in a complicated situation, and how would he or she react? So it's really about that. But when I start writing, I usually have the end in mind.
Right.
Because in a film, you have to have that. You can afford not to have the end in mind when you're writing a novel. But when you're writing a script, you have to be clear.
And with the ending in particular, because the quality of a film or an audience's reaction to a film often will hinge. I mean, it has to be good all the way through, of course, because if you're watching a film and after 2 minutes you're thinking this is terrible, you're going to walk out. But the stumbling block to my mind would be, I've got to make sure it's got a good ending.
That's true.
How do you make sure you've got that? I don't know if you can possibly talk about that. I don't know if you can answer that, because it's got to be gripping, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. You see, not just the ending. I believe that because today, because there are, especially when you're promoting a film or exhibiting a film on social media or YouTube is the toughest platform there is for holding a person's interest. Because there is so much content that's fighting.
Exactly. We all do it. Yeah.
There's so much content that's fighting for attention. The other video is just one swipe away. So you have to hold interest all through the film, and not just the ending, because otherwise the viewer will not even reach the end. So that's why the film is, I'm very clear about my scripts. Before it goes on the floors, every single scene is worked out, every single dialogue is written.
Yeah.
And only when I believe that it will hold attention, that I start going to prep. So that's very true.
And how long did the whole of this process take?
The writing?
Well, from beginning to end, from the initial thought to the finished film.
Well, the writing can sometimes take pretty long. I have scripts lying with me for maybe a year or two or something, but once the script is ready, then usually, we start with auditioning, and I audition people personally.
But what about the draft? So when you're drafting the script, so which draft did you end up with to make this film? How many did you go through?
The final draft, because once one is sure, then that's how it is. And after that also there are some changes. Sometimes during the rehearsal process, I could work with an actor who's not comfortable with a certain dialogue. If something's not rolling off the tongue.
It's not working.
Or when I see them rehearsing, I feel that it appears a little contrived, it's not convincing, then I make changes.
Yeah.
And I also use improvisation sometimes to make changes. In an improvisation, sometimes something comes out. And, this because filmmaking, like we know, is a collaborative process. It's everybody brings their own talent and energy to the sets, and that's the magic that you see, and that is what translates into the final film. So you have to leave scope for that. One can't really be necessarily tied down to the final draft also.
Yeah.
So till it's been filmed, there's always scope for some change and some tweaking.
And when I've spoken to dozens and hundreds of filmmakers, but I'm always interested in the casting process, because I remember one filmmaker saying to me, because I was asking him about the casting, and he said he works on the principle that he knows within 20 seconds if someone's right for the role. And I said honestly, because he'd been reading filmmaking for a long time. He said, I'll know virtually by the time they've sat down and uttered a couple of words. But he didn't enjoy the casting process very much. Maybe because he's been around for years, I don't know. So can you tell me, how quickly did you know the two leads were right? Because they've got to be right for the film, but also they've got to have chemistry, right? That's very important, yeah? So how long did it take to get the right people, and how long did it take to know that they were right for the role?
See, in case of casting, we don't do cattle calls, in terms of just having an open audition and inviting everyone. Generally,
right.
I invite people to send in their pictures and videos and past, links to past work which I can see. And then we shortlist a certain number of actors who we think may be suitable for the role. And then I invite them for the audition. So then if somebody is invited for an audition to my company, so they already have a good shot at landing the part. Because it's only after the
So you might only invite 10 people, for instance, or however many.
Yeah.
So, right, okay.
So only select people get invited, and only after we invite them, then I audition them personally. And usually, there could be an improvisation, it could be a scene from the film, it could be whatever. And then if it comes through, and if I think, they have to look the part, and they have to be able to deliver. They have to be able to take directions well. Looking the part also plays, it's more than half the battle won.
And did you know quickly with these? I'm not saying you might have known in 20 seconds, but did you know relatively quickly?
Not that quickly. Naturally, I usually, sometimes there's a first round and then there's a second round. But this time it was, I think, things fell in place pretty quickly, because you do realize that, not 20 seconds, but quick enough.
Okay. And did you have to, when you're say you've got the female lead, do you have to act the part of the male lead, or how does that work? Because I'm assuming she's reading lines, but she presumably needs someone to bounce off. Are you taking up that part and to say, well, hang on, I'll do it, or how does it work?
No, when I audition, sometimes because there are multiple artists showing up for the audition, so I sometimes have them enact a scene with each other. I don't necessarily have them enact a scene from the film as such, because the whole idea is to see how they interpret a particular scene, how well they take directions, and how talented they are, how good they are at their craft. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a scene from the film.
Right, okay.
So any two artists can be put together, and you can have them work. So
let's assume, and obviously this didn't happen with your film, let's assume you've got the male and female role, they're perfect, but then suddenly, this must have crossed your mind, you put them together and it's not working, then you've got a problem, haven't you? Because it must happen. Obviously it didn't happen with you because they're there, but it must happen.
Sometimes these kind of things do happen, but then, see, filmmaking is fraught with uncertainty. There's always so much uncertainty that you have to brace for it and realize that always, you can plan for a lot of things, but invariably something will go wrong which you hadn't planned for.
Yeah, we say men plan and God laughs. I don't know if that's a similar thing to what you say. It might be a saying to what you say, but so tell me about what you're doing to drive your career forward. Because my feeling is, yes, you're doing the short films, but features is, I guess, is where you're trying to get to. That's probably the dream of most filmmakers. So what are you doing? Because I should point out that actually you're very good at promotion, and I know that because I've looked at stuff you've done and you sent me some bits and pieces over, and you're a really good example of what you should do, because actually most filmmakers, or a lot of filmmakers, are not promoting the way but obviously you're part of the social media, you've grown up with it, so you know the way it works, right? Okay, so that's great. So what are you doing in terms of, I know what you're doing, give us a flavour of the promotion you're doing with this and how you're trying to lead on to your next project, because I'm assuming that you've got other projects, perhaps one of them is a feature. So how is this, what's the pathway at the moment?
Right now, I have several scripts in development. I have some which are short films, some which are web series. There is a feature script which I'm working on, and I'm hoping to make a feature soon. And let's see how things really go. And about promotion, I think social media helps, because once you put it out there on social media, then if people like it, they share it. There's a certain democratization that has come in because of social media, like I said. Sometimes if it's good content, it just takes off. If it's not very good, then it goes to the bottom. So that's really, you don't have to, even when your content is fighting for attention with huge companies, but this is a sort of level playing field in that sense.
And you said something earlier which was really interesting, which, about the difficulty of breaking into the film industry, because we know it's difficult. But in India, is there, we would call it a closed shop, and what I mean by that is, for instance, industries in the UK, not so much now because it's changed radically, but say you wanted to get into a certain industry, often what I mean by closed shop is, unless you were with a family member was there, or a connection, it was very difficult. Is it the same in the film industry in India, or has that changed? What's the situation?
Well, naturally, if you know people who are well connected, or if you belong to a family like that, you do have an edge over others who are rank outsiders, because quite often they don't even know how the film industry works, and then naturally, because there's so much money riding on it, sometimes they want to encourage their own kids and others. But I think that's true more for actors than for filmmakers and writers and all that. So I have never experienced anything of that sort so far.
Let's imagine, thank you. Let's imagine, for instance, I was a friend of yours and known you for years, knew what you did, didn't have any interest in filmmaking, then one day came to you and said, look, Vikkramm, I'm actually thinking of getting into filmmaking. I need some advice. What would your advice be to me?
Well, I hardly think I'm in the position to really give advice that way. I'll only share my experience with you, and if you can learn from that and if it can make you richer in some way, good for you. But
because I suppose the point I'm getting at is, I know filmmaking is a very tough business. There are long days, it's expensive, you have to deal with lots of problems, particularly if you're the producer, writer, director, when you wear all the hats that you wear. Is it a case of, because people can be quite naive about filmmaking, they see these films and they think, I should walk in the park, they go to these red carpet events, but I know that life isn't like that. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is the advice in terms of how hard it is, the commitment that you need to break through, because it is hard, it is tough, and that's. I guess I'm trying to ask you to be how you be a realist and to say, listen, this is what you need to know.
Well, in fact, if you're an absolute realist, then I don't think you'll get into filmmaking.
Because you got no way.
It'll scare you away. You have to think with your heart. Sometimes it's a labor of love, and you realize that. Sometimes short films, for instance, don't make money.
That's right. Yeah.
You're building an audience, and you're working towards a dream, and you have to believe in the dream. That's really what it's all about. So.
Thank you. And when you see, let's say, The Perfect Murder, use that. Is it possible to explain to me how you felt? I mean, you've seen the film, you've seen it thousands of times. You created the film. You were there in the editing suite. You were putting it all together. But your feeling when other people saw it for the very first time, with you in a screening room or in an editing suite, whatever, but people that hadn't seen your film before, there's a group of people, you're watching this for the first time, it's completely a picture with other people. Is it possible to give a sense of your feeling as you've seen that? Because, as I say, I know you've already seen it.
Yeah. See, invariably, because you've seen your film so many times when you're editing it. I edit my own film. So, it's very hard to detach yourself from that. So it's always good for people to watch it and give you an opinion.
Yeah.
And that feels very nice, and you're always unsure about how people will react when a film initially comes out. It's only when over the first 1 or 2 days or whatever, when people take to it, that you feel relieved. I think that would be true for all filmmakers, because
it's a fantastic film, fantastic short film.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.